Hello, and welcome to Inventors Helping Inventors. I'm your host, Alan Beckley, inventor of the Wonder Wallet. If you're an inventor searching for proven ways to make money with your invention, if you dream to see your product selling in stores everywhere, you've come to the right place. There's no better place to get help than from experts, inventors who've already achieved success. Every week, I interview successful inventors, asking them the questions you want to know. Tune in to learn from the experts so you can get your invention out of the tank and into the bank.
The following year, I retired from the high school so that I could work full-time for the Global Uplift Project, because that way I could help thousands of children every year in the developing world, rather than hundreds of children here in the U.S.
I want to thank you for being a loyal listener to the Inventors Helping Inventors podcast. Come this January, it will have been going for 6 years. Can you believe that? And it wouldn't be going if it weren't for listeners like you. Whether this is your first time listening or your 100th time or more, I appreciate every listener, and I love hearing from you. You can always reach me at alan@alanbeckley.com. But I'd like to ask you to do 2 things that can help the podcast immensely. The first one is tell a friend about the podcast. Tell another inventor. And even if they've never listened to a podcast, they can listen to every episode by going to alanbeckley.com/podcast. So if you spread the word, that'll help immensely. The other one, if you don't mind taking just 2 or 3 minutes and give a rating and review on either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. That makes a huge difference in drawing more listeners to the podcast. So once again, thank you so much for being a loyal listener, and I enjoy bringing you these podcasts every week. November is upon us, and the year is almost over. As an inventor, this is a perfect time to hone your marketing message so that you're ready to hit the ground running in January to approach companies with your product. Through premium coaching, I've helped quite a few inventors just like you to do just that, to create your clear, concise, and compelling marketing pitch. I'm happy to help you gain traction with your product, as I have for other podcast listeners. So if you're hearing, it's not really for us, it means your marketing message is unclear to them. It's not compelling. That's why they say no. If you'd like to know more, to see if premium coaching might be a fit for you, just email me at alan@alanbeckley.com and put premium coaching in the subject line. I'll get back with you to set up a Zoom meeting. But don't wait, as I have room to take on only 2 more clients at this time. So again, just email me at alan@alanbeckley.com and put premium coaching in the subject line, and I'll get back with you to set up a Zoom meeting. Welcome to episode number 460. Today, I interview Brenda Birrell. Brenda Birrell grew up in England. After graduating from Cambridge University, Brenda taught high school physics. In 1983, she and her husband moved to Los Altos, California, where they raised 2 daughters. She returned to the education field in 2001 and then retired in 2017 so that she could work full-time for the Global Uplift Project and help thousands of children in the developing world every year instead of hundreds of children in the U.S. Today, Brenda is the Global Uplift Project's program director. She loves working on all the TGUP's projects, but Save a Girl is the closest to her heart. As well as her work with TGUP, she enjoys traveling, hiking, singing, baking, listening to classical music, and spending time with family and friends. You'll want to listen to this entire interview where Brenda shares how, growing up, her mom made all the clothing for their family using a treadle sewing machine and passed that skill on to Brenda. Little did Brenda know that that skill and knowledge would lead to her helping thousands of girls in the developing countries to have better lives. Also, how she discovered while working in Africa for TGUP that girls were dropping out of school because their families lacked funds and access to tampons. So they soon fell behind in schoolwork and then dropped out. And finally, how she worked to solve this problem by inventing and developing specially designed pads that were low cost, hygienic, and could be safely washed and reused multiple times for up to 3 to 5 years, keeping the girls in school and providing them with brighter futures. Now let's get right to our interview with Brenda Birrell. Well, Brenda Birrell, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast with us today.
Thank you, Alan. It's an honor to be here.
I want to start by asking, can you share a little bit of your background with our listeners? Like, where did you grow up and go to school? And what did you do before you became an inventor? Could you share that with our listeners?
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. I grew up in England. My family was comfortable, but not very affluent. And so my mother made all of our clothing. And at a young age, I learned to sew and to knit. And by the time I finished high school, I was making all my own clothes. I went to Cambridge University and I met my husband there. And after graduating, I was teaching physics at a high school in the area, and he was finishing up his PhD. So we didn't have a lot of income, and I made all of our own clothes, including his dress shirts, jeans, and so on, using a treadle sewing machine. When he finished his PhD, he worked in Cambridge for a while at the university teaching, and then we moved to Silicon Valley in 1983. I was a stay-at-home mother while our daughters were growing up, but I did a lot of fundraising for the local schools and that sort of thing. In 2001, though, I went back into the education field, and I worked in the high school in Los Altos, where I live, where I was happily helping hundreds of students every year. In 2016, however, my husband died. And the following year, I retired from the high school so that I could work full-time for the Global Uplift Project. Because that way, I could help thousands of children every year in the developing world, rather than hundreds of children here in the US.
That's an amazing story. And about you started out, of course, in England. You met your husband there. You went to Cambridge. And then I like that you were teaching physics, but it's the common sort of background to a certain degree that I see with almost every inventor is they did a variety of creative things. And since as you grew up, your mom made all the clothes for you and your family and taught you how to do the same, then you carried on in that same realm. And when you and your husband, when he's finishing up his PhD and all the rest of it, you were making his clothes for him as well as your own clothes. So you became, let's just say, quite the seamstress, like it's second nature for you, which as rolling forward, as we'll see as we get into this a little bit further, it served you well in some of your next endeavors. And then you had mentioned that you did move to Silicon Valley in 1983. And then during that period, you started fundraising. So that's an amazing story. And as we move forward, can you briefly share with our listeners the problem that you saw that causes 20 million girls in the developing world to drop out of school? Also, why was this problem not being effectively addressed and solved, would you say?
I was in Africa with the nonprofit I work for, and I noticed that there were far more boys than girls at the secondary schools. I found out that the girls dropped out of school as soon as they started having their period, or actually a few months later, because they missed a few days every month, and soon they were so far behind, they were going to drop out. So we're losing half of humanity's potential because we aren't educating girls. It's a catastrophe. When countries that are a low level of economic development, the work is all physical labor, and the men have the stronger muscles, of course, do the work better. But for countries to advance economically, they need to move into areas like engineering that require thinking, not just physical labor. And here the women are equally as good as the men. But the women can't do this work to which they're particularly suited unless they're educated. Yet in many countries, of course, women are still considered to be unclean when they have their period. And in some places, they aren't even allowed in the houses during that time. Some of the girls that I met had been so desperate to continue their education that they would pay for pads. And everywhere that we work, I asked our local participants, our local partners, what the cost was for this. And every single place said that the cost of one disposable pad was one sex act. So no wonder the girls were getting pregnant. But they were doing this because they were so desperately trying to stay in school.
As girls got old enough to start having their periods, then obviously they're going to start missing classes. I say obviously in this environment because I think you had mentioned when I chatted with you before that worlds of people live on less than $1 a day in Africa. And so buying things that we would take for granted is not a given. And that these girls would be desperate to have pads, which were, I believe, largely unaffordable for them. But they were told the price for the pad was a sex act, which is just horrible. But this was the environment that you found so many of these girls were subjected to in Africa that kept them really effectively out of the education system. It's like wiping out half the workforce. So moving forward from there, you worked hard to find a solution to this, a hygienic pad that girls could use during their periods, allowing them to stay in school. Women in developed countries find access to tampons accessible and affordable. But as we were talking about, millions of people, particularly in Africa, live on less than $1 a day, making Western solutions unaffordable for them. Can you describe how you invented pads uniquely designed so that the villagers and these girls could use them and afford them? Could you share that story with us?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, here's what the challenge was. I needed to come up with something that would work. It needed to hold the blood. It needed to be able to be worn so that it could do that. It had to be affordable. And that meant it had to be made from readily available local fabrics. They had to be soft, and yet they had to hold up to repeated washings over several years. Also, it couldn't look like a pad because when it was hanging on the line to dry, it would be too embarrassing for the girls. And it needed to dry quickly so that it would dry in the sun and it could be reused. Not only that, but I had to be able to produce them using inexperienced women sewing in places like Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and so on treadle sewing machines. So I worked with the local women on the design, our partners in these different countries, and we went through many iterations, just slight changes, but before we came up with the solution that we have now. So once we had the design, that was the easy part in a way, because I then had to learn about cost accounting, something which I knew nothing about. I had to work out how much it would cost to set up a sewing center, how much it would cost to make a kit once the sewing center was set up. And after that had all been done, I had to set up the sewing centers. I had to write an assembly manual for how they could make these. I had to have it translated into the local languages. And then I had to go over and train the seamstresses in how to do this. This was really exciting, though. And not only did I teach the seamstresses how to make the kits, I also taught them how to make other things like school uniforms, shopping bags, curtains, whatever they could make and would sell in their area. And by the way, the kits are always given free to the girls. Girls, as you said, are from families where the whole family lives on less than $1 a day.
Well, that's again just amazing. I mean, if you just look at every inventor faces challenges, but you listed probably something like a dozen because of what you were given. It had to hold the blood, it had to be affordable, it had to stand up to repeated washings and dry quickly and yet not look like a pad to avoid embarrassment. One thing I would like to highlight just for a moment here, again, for our listeners being, I won't say all Westerners, but a lot of Westerners, is they normally pads are one use and throwaway item in the Western world. Why was it particularly important that they had to be able to be reused and washable and still work effectively? Could you share that with us?
Part of the problem is not only were the pads expensive for the girls to buy, there was no way of disposing of disposables. There are places where people have tried doing this. And I knew somebody who got a lot of pads sent over by one of the pad companies and got panties sent over by one of the underwear companies. And the girls were able to stay in school. But they discovered when she went back, she discovered that the latrines were almost filled with disposable pads. And the chain link fence that was along outside the building that has a diamond pattern in it, there were used folded pads tucked into the diamonds because there was no way to get rid of them. There's no garbage pickup. We're talking about a very different environment. And the only way that people can really get rid of their garbage there is to take it down and have a bonfire at the corner of the street and burn it on an evening. The trouble is, the men are all sitting there around the fire to keep warm on an evening. And so if a girl walks to put her pad on the fire and dispose of it that way, everybody sees what she's doing. They don't have paper bags or they don't have extras of anything in which she could hide the pad. So there's not only the problem of paying for a pad, but there's also the problem of disposing of a disposable pad.
That makes perfect sense. And again, once you project your thought process into the environment that these girls find themselves in, and as we mentioned earlier, a lot of girls in Africa and other countries as well, this is part of their living experience. So solving this problem is huge for them. And I'd like to ask a sort of follow-on question, which you may have already touched on this because you spoke to several different challenges. But what would you say maybe was your biggest challenge in designing, again, reusable hygienic pads that girls could wash and reuse? What would you say was your biggest challenge in doing that?
The biggest challenge was working out what to use for the waterproof layer that's inside the panty shield. So here, for example, I use a polyurethane laminated fabric, but frequently that's not available in the developing world. So I thought and thought about what they could use, and eventually it dawned on me that they could use something like umbrella fabric, because really it just needed to be something that was waterproof and flexible, because it had to be something that when the girls walked and they were wearing these, it would be very embarrassing if it went crinkle, crinkle as they walked. So I had thought it would be difficult to find out who would need the kits, but that wasn't the problem. The girls, as soon as we started distributing them, word got out. And of course, our partners on the ground knew which schools the girls needed the kits at. But the biggest challenge, as I say, was to find a suitable waterproof layer to put inside.
Thanks for sharing that. And again, you highlighted that once again, materials that are very common in the Western world, like polyurethane fabric, are just not available there. Then you had to be, once again, inventive and creative and say, what mocks that kind of material? And then you thought something like an umbrella material. And main thing, it just had to be waterproof and flexible. So that's, once again, I can just see as you've described this story, how going through challenge after challenge from a design perspective to create what at the end of the day is truly a very unique product compared to what sells in the rest of the world. So I was going to ask you, how many girls would you say have received the reusable pad kits from your organization, Saber Girl? And also has solving the problem of girls missing up to 20% of their classes because of their periods provided other benefits to both the girls themselves, their families, as well as their communities. And how has this provided a brighter future for these girls? Can you share some of your thoughts on that?
Oh, yes, I'll be happy to. So more than 93,000 girls have received kits in 11 different countries. And I thought, and intellectually it seemed like they had to be doing good, and you just hope and pray that they will be. But it wasn't until relatively recently that we did a survey on girls who had had their kits for at least a year and preferably 2 years to find out what the difference was and if it really was making a difference or if they really were making a difference. So we did a large survey of girls who'd had their pads. And when the results came in, it was so exciting It was just wonderful to discover that the kids were doing exactly what I'd hoped they would do and what it seemed like they should be doing. So they've reduced the number of days of school missed by the girls by more than 93%. They've reduced the number of pregnancies by more than 94%. The national test scores for the girls in grades 7 and 8 have gone up by 33.4%. And the scores for high school girls have gone up by 14.8%. So why do these numbers matter? They really matter because, as the World Bank says, a better educated girl is one of the best assets to her community. She delays marriage, she has children later, she educates her children better, she has better job options, and she contributes more to her community. And more immediately, not only are we helping these girls and keeping them in school, we're also helping the ladies who make the kits, because these ladies frequently have been people who lived in the slums or they were abused wives. They are now considered to be successful businesswomen who are contributing to their society, to their local community. They are so excited to be helping the girls in their area. We also, not only do we give the girls the kits at each of these distributions, the seamstresses and the trainers give the kits to the girls, but they also give them some education. So they are taught about female biology, about feminine hygiene, how to look after their kits so that they will last well. But they're also taught some self-defense moves so that they can defend themselves if they are attacked by some of these unscrupulous men. And some of the things that these men say are just awful. And remember, we're talking about 11, 12, or maybe 13-year-old girls. But men will say something like, I have HIV or I have AIDS. And they'll look the girl in the eye and they'll say, but you do know, don't you, that it can be cured by having sex with a virgin. So it makes your blood run cold when you hear something like this. But this is the sort of thing that the girls are being told. And then these young girls think, oh, how selfish of me not to have sex with this man because I could save his life. And so these girls have to be told what the truth is. That's just one example of why they need to have the education component of what they're given at every distribution.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, and just so amazing that you went and then able to get statistics across girls that have been using these for 1 to 2 years. And these are amazing statistics, like missed classes are down by, I think you said 93%, and
Yes.
pregnancy rate down 94%. And I think also it's useful for us in the West to realize, in a country like that, when a girl gets pregnant, the rest of her life is pretty much lined up, and it's not a very desirable one where she's going to be impoverished. She's going to really have no economic choices. She perhaps will be a mate to somebody that she doesn't love, and he doesn't love her. I'm projecting my own thinking, but I suspect that's accurate.
Yes, if the girls drop out of school, then whether or not they're pregnant, their choices are awful. They can be sold into the sex trade. They can be sold as a child bride. They can work as a domestic servant, or they can do some very low paid menial job, like planting rice in the paddy fields in Nepal or picking tea leaves in Kenya. Whatever choice they make, they're second class citizens for the rest of their lives. And mostly there's a high incidence of maternal death. And so the reason the girls are sold as child brides is that there are men who have other children and they want someone to look after their children. So they'll marry a young bride to look after the children, the existing children. But of course, within a year, they then start having babies of their own. So it's really a life of drudgery. And this was unimaginable to me before I found out about it. Just never occurred to me that this would be going on.
Again, thank you for sharing that. And as you were describing all these scenarios, from a high level, what kept going through my mind is what you have done is you've given these girls a degree of freedom and choices that they likely did not have before. Would you say that's true?
That is absolutely true. These girls can now have dreams and aspirations that they could never have imagined before. Not only that, but the Global Uplift Project is also supplying schools with science labs and other ways of staying in school. So these girls now have dreams of becoming a doctor or a nurse. They're just blown away by the choices that they now have. And I love looking at the faces of the girls when they get their kids. I have on our website, I have photographs from every distribution we've ever done. And I never tire of looking at those happy faces.
As we roll towards a close, I'd like to ask you, are there any parting words you'd like to leave us with?
Well, these kits last 3 to 5 years and they only cost $6, but they're always given free to the girls and they're all funded by our donors. But the thing I would like our listeners to remember, if nothing else, is that this is the most direct, inexpensive, and proven way to improve the human condition. And it works at a cost of only $2 a year. That's less than half a cent a day. Is a girl worth that much? I certainly think she is.
Thank you. And that leads my final question, actually, and that is how can our listeners reach you if they have other questions or if they would like to contribute or donate to Save a Girl and the Global Uplift? Could you share that with us?
Well, yes. If they would like to help some of the poorest girls in the world to stay in school, or if they'd just like to find out more, they could look online for the Global Uplift Project or tgup.org, or they could email me. My email address is Brenda B, that's B as in boy, RENDAB at tgup.org.
Well, thank you for that. Again, the Global Uplift Organization, they can reach at www.tgup.org, and they can reach you at Brenda, B as in boy, Brenda B at tgup.org. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
Brenda, I just want to thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today and sharing your amazing story and how the impact you're having on girls all over the world who have had very limited choices before. And now you've expanded their opportunities and their choices and given them options to bring joy and value to their lives. So that's an amazing story. And I also would like to reserve the opportunity, maybe another 6 months or a year, to follow up with you and find out how things are progressing and what else you've got going on at that time.
That sounds wonderful. And it's not only the girls who benefit from this. As I said, it's the girls do benefit, but also the seamstresses there and the people here who donate. We all feel bigger. We feel better when we help someone else. And I just feel so privileged and blessed to have the opportunity to help so many girls in the developing world. So it's a true joy to me to be able to do this. And the work I'm doing requires the experience that I've had in every aspect of my life up until now. And so it's fun to bring it all together. But I'm a bit of a dilettante. I like to do a little bit of all sorts of different things. And this gives me the opportunity to combine many things, many parts of my life into helping these girls. So thank you so much.
Of course. And my final comment is how would you have ever known in all those years ago when you were growing up and your mom was making clothes for the family and you later carried on that tradition, that particular skill set was going to lend itself to something of extreme value just a few years down the road?
You wouldn't, would you?
No, so that's an amazing story. Thank you so much, Brenda. And I really enjoyed having you on the podcast.
Thank you.
So you're done searching for your product and it's not out there. Yay! Maybe you filed for a provisional patent and done some marketing research or surveys. Heck, maybe you've even created a rough prototype, then found that, although it kind of works, it looks like something from the Stone Age. You'd be embarrassed to show it to your friends, much less to a manufacturer for a licensing pitch. What if I could put you in touch with a guy who offers free consultations, takes no money down, no money up front, and will give you a quote on your project before he starts? What if I told you that this same guy can help you design your product and make you a virtual prototype before you ever put a penny into building a physical one? What if I told you he could make you patent drawings, CAD files for manufacturing, and even make marketing videos and build you a website? If this sounds like someone you want to talk to, let me introduce you to my first podcast sponsor, Brian Keast at I Draw Dreams for Inventors. With 3.5 years of trade school and 15 years of mechanical experience working as a mechanic for General Motors, you have someone that's seen countless design failures and how they were fixed. Also, he had a 25-year career as a general contractor who designed his own houses and remodels on computer-aided design. In getting plans through countless building departments, he gained a tremendous amount of experience by working directly with structural engineers. The many years of combined experience in these two careers gave him a unique look into stresses and failures in design. He brings this wealth of knowledge and experience to his company, I Draw Dreams, as the CAD guy who will design a product for you that will work. Every inventor I've referred to Brian has come away delighted with the work he has done for them, and I think you will too. Just make sure to tell them that Alan sent you. Thanks so much for tuning in to Inventors Helping Inventors. If you like the show, please tell your friends about it. Make sure to subscribe in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss a single episode. Talk to you soon.